The wind tore across the open plains like a ghost desperate to be heard, flinging dust into the dying light of the sun. Orange bled into crimson, smearing the horizon with the color of old wounds. From that emptiness came the slow rhythm of hooves, for steady beats striking hardened earth, each one softer than the last, like a heartbeat fading. She rode alone. Her coat was long, black once, now dull to the color of spent gunpowder. A wide hat shadowed her face, but the curve of her jaw, the rigid stillness of her posture, told the truth. She wasn't lost. She was hunting, and though her figure was slight in the saddle, there was no mistaking the steel in her frame. Clara Briggs. Once she was known as the woman behind Jed Briggs, the sharpest shot and fastest draw this side of the Missouri. But that was before the fire, before the ash, before she buried a life no one else even believed she had the strength to avenge. 6 months had passed since they brought her Jed's blood-soaked hat and told her he'd burned in the canyon with Pike Holloway's bullets in his back. She never wept, not where anyone could see. Instead, she packed what was left of her soul, strapped Jed's old Colt under her ribs, and rode into the silence. The town that rose ahead of her looked like it was built by bones. Gallows Creek was nothing more than a strip of decaying wood and unwashed men clinging to a dry riverbed like ticks on a dead dog. The mining rush had ended years ago, but what remained was worse than ghosts. Drifters, thieves, broken men pretending to be hard. Clara's horse whinnied once as she pulled back the reins. A rusted sign above the saloon swung lazily in the wind, creaking like a neck about to snap. She dismounted slowly, her boots hitting the dirt with quiet weight. Heads turned. A woman, riding alone, dressed in morning black. Not something Gallows Creek had seen in a long while. She walked inside like she owned the floor beneath her feet. The saloon was thick with smoke and sweat. A piano wheezed somewhere in the back, its keys worn as the fingers pounding them. Laughter, rough and mean, cut through the room like broken glass. But all that stopped the moment Clara stepped in. Her presence drew every eye, every sneer. The barkeep froze mid-pour. She approached the counter and set one gloved hand down, the leather cracked from too many days in the sun. "I'm looking for Pike Holloway," she said. Not loud, not soft either, just enough to let it settle like dust in the lungs. The barkeep's jaw tightened. His eyes flicked behind her, then to the floor. "Don't know the name," he muttered. Clara tilted her head slightly. The silence behind her shifted, men leaning closer, listening. "You do," she replied. She didn't press further. She just turned, scanning the room slowly. Faces withdrew. Some turned back to their drinks. Others watched with the kind of look dogs give when they know a boot's coming. But in the far back, near the shadows that clung like rot, four figures didn't flinch. The Holloway gang. 4 brothers, hard-eyed and thick with the kind of cruelty that didn't need words. One chewed a matchstick. The other 2 smiled like they'd already picked out the pieces of Clara they wanted to keep. The 4th, broadest of them, nodded once, just a flicker of recognition. She'd found the right place. She didn't look at them again. She didn't have to. Upstairs, the saloon gave her the attic room. No lantern, just a thin mattress, broken glass in the window frame, and the faint stench of whiskey that soaked into the walls like regret. Clara lit a single match and knelt beside the bed. Her bag opened with a soft rustle. From inside, she pulled a worn silver locket and held it in her palm. Inside was a photo, Jed, smiling like he hadn't yet learned the world could be so cruel. His arm was around her in the picture, and her eyes, younger then, still held something soft. Beneath the photo, folded so tightly the creases had nearly worn through, was a bounty poster. She unfolded it with care, as though the paper might tear just from the air. The ink was faded but legible. Asterisk wanted, Pike Holloway, for murder, arson, and betrayal of oath. Dead or alive, asterisk. Her thumb traced Pike's face on the page. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. She just stared, the silence around her thick with unspoken promises. Below, laughter swelled again. Glass broke. Boots stomped. Someone shouted something vulgar, and a woman screamed, then laughed in a way that didn't sound quite real. Clara closed the locket and slid it back into her coat. Outside the cracked window, Gallows Creek stirred like something diseased, for shadows moved through the street toward the saloon, swaggering, loud with the kind of arrogance only men too sure of their own violence could carry. One of them, the youngest Holloway brother, spat into the dirt and said, "That pretty little crow upstairs? I got plans for her tonight." Another chuckled. "Think she knows who we are?" "She will," the third said, grinning, "once we teach her how to scream." From her perch above, Clara watched the shadows move. She didn't flinch. She didn't run. She unbuckled Jed's revolver from the back of her waistband and laid it on the bed like a sacred thing. 6 bullets. Polished. Counted. She touched each one. Below, footsteps began to climb the stairs, and in the dead quiet of the attic, Clara Briggs stood up. The light in her memory was always golden. It poured across the wooden porch in the late summer afternoons, wrapping around the sounds of wind chimes and Jed's soft laughter. Clara remembered those days with aching clarity. The weight of a coffee tin in her hand, the metallic click of empty cans lined up along the fence post, the smell of sage and sweat on her husband's shirt. He stood behind her, arms wrapped around hers, guiding her grip. "Don't fight the recoil," he whispered, chin resting on her shoulder. "Let it roll through you." She pulled the trigger and missed. Jed laughed, warm and full. "Still don't see what we're practicing for," she muttered, pretending not to smile. Jed kissed the curve of her jaw. "For the hell of it. For the art. Or maybe just so I don't get too far ahead of you when the wolves come." And then he said something she would remember long after everything else had burned away. "A woman who can shoot don't have to run." Their cabin was humble, just 2 rooms and a lean-to, but it sat on a rise that overlooked the bluffs. The front door opened to the wind. The kitchen smelled like pine resin and ash. On the windowsill, a single cactus bloomed every spring. Inside, a small hand-carved cradle stood in the corner, draped in faded linen, waiting. It never rocked. Clara remembered sitting beside that cradle in silence, her fingers tracing the grain of the wood like it might whisper answers. Jed never said much about the baby. He grieved quietly, in the barn, or when splitting wood until his hands bled. But every night, he'd rest his gun against the bedpost and hold her close. And that was enough. For a while, Pike Holloway came back into their lives the way snakes do, quiet, sudden, poisonous. He rode up on a stolen Mustang, boots too polished for a man who claimed he'd been living honest. Jed had known him from the war, trusted him once. They'd ridden together after Appomattox, worked side by side as lawmen until Pike turned greedy, started taking gold off the bodies of men he killed. Jed cut ties, hard and final. But Pike wasn't the type to forget a man who'd humiliated him. "I'm going to meet him," Jed said that morning, strapping on his holster with eyes like cold iron. "He's claiming he wants to bury it. I don't believe him, but I gotta see for myself." Clara's voice had cracked when she asked him not to go. Jed just kissed her once slow and said, "If I don't come back, you light the fire and let the world see it burn." She waited 3 nights. On the 4th, the marshal came with a bundle wrapped in bloodied linen. Jed's hat, scorched and stained. His badge, melted to the brim. "Pike lit the canyon on fire," the marshal said, eyes soft with shame. "Tossed dynamite into the ravine. No one got out." Clara didn't scream. She didn't fall. She just took the hat and walked back inside. The door closed behind her like a final breath. 2 weeks later, the sky turned orange. She saw the flames first, then the riders. 4 of them, wearing red bandanas and firing their rifles into the air as they came. Clara tried to run, but they shot her horse in the yard. She bolted through the back window, the glass slicing her arm, the pain clean and sharp. Bullets slammed into the house behind her as she crawled through the sagebrush, with Jed's rifle strapped to her back and a bullet lodged deep in her thigh. They burned everything. She watched from the ridge as her home, the cradle, the porch, the wind chimes, was swallowed by fire. One of the outlaws pissed on the garden before laughing and riding off. That night, Clara dug the bullet out herself, with a hunting knife, and nearly passed out from the pain. She didn't cry. Not when the smoke curled into the stars. Not when she buried what was left of Jed's shirt in the ashes. Something broke open inside her, and nothing gentle ever grew there again. Now, in the still blackness of the attic room above Gallows Creek Saloon, she sat with her knees pulled to her chest, the locket clutched in her fist like a relic. Her face was turned to the wall, but her eyes were far away, lost somewhere between the cradle and the fire. Outside the window, the wind knocked gently. Somewhere below, boots creaked. The town never slept. She opened the locket. Jed stared back at her, smiling like he didn't know how badly the world would betray him. She pressed her forehead to the metal and whispered, "I'm almost there." Then she pulled his old hat from her saddlebag, still dark with the blood they'd claimed as proof of his death. She held it tight to her chest and let the pain wash over her like the tide, silent and deep. They'd taken everything. Her home, her child, her husband, but they'd made one mistake. They let her live. And in the quiet of that room, with the memory of flames behind her eyes and the cold steel of revenge in her heart, Clara Briggs ceased being a widow. She became the ghost that followed Pike Holloway to his grave. Night fell hard over Gallows Creek. The town slumped into darkness, like a drunk collapsing into the dirt, lit only by the flicker of oil lamps and the red glow of cigars smoldering outside the saloon. The air thickened with the stink of sweat, horse piss, and stale whiskey. Inside, the piano stumbled through a broken melody, off-key and desperate. Men shouted across tables, some laughing too loud, others laughing too late. Cards slapped down. Bottles cracked open. A fight erupted near the far corner, chairs toppling, fists finding jaws. No one cared. Upstairs, Clara sat in silence. Her room was swallowed in shadow, the moon's silver outline barely illuminating the warped floorboards and cracked glass of the narrow window. She didn't light a lamp, didn't move. Her breath was quiet, shallow. Every muscle in her body had settled into stillness, the kind forged by hours of waiting and years of pain. She was sitting on the bed's edge, Jed's revolver in her lap, cleaned and loaded. The weight of it was familiar now, less a weapon than a part of her. Below, footsteps shifted. Voices turned low. Laughter curdled. They were coming. Downstairs, behind the bar, the saloon owner stiffened as four men approached him, tall, dirty, swaggering like dogs who tasted blood. The oldest Holloway brother leaned in, his breath sour with tobacco and rot. "You didn't see us go up," he said, tapping a coin on the counter. "You didn't hear nothing neither." The barkeep swallowed, eyes darting to the ceiling. "She ain't looking for trouble. She's already in it," another muttered, grinning. The four of them moved toward the stairs, slow and deliberate, boots thudding like hammers in the hollow bones of the saloon. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Everyone understood what kind of night it was shaping up to be. Clara heard them coming before the second step. Her eyes never left the door. She rose, silent as breath, and crossed to the far wall. Her shadow moved like smoke in the dark. The revolver was already in her hand, her thumb brushing the hammer. She didn't panic. She didn't pray. She listened. The stairs creaked once, twice, 3 times. Then silence. Shadows shifted beneath the door. One of them chuckled softly on the other side. They kicked it in. The door slammed open against the wall, dust flying, hinges shrieking in protest. 4 men filled the frame, eyes gleaming, grins sharp and filthy. "Well now," said the one in front, his voice greasy. "Ain't this something? Pretty little thing just waiting on us." The second one stepped in, licking his lips. "A widow in black. You look like death itself, girl." "She is," the third muttered, eyes flicking to her hand. But it was too late. They thought she'd scream, that she'd beg, that she'd cower, wide-eyed and shaking like so many before her. They didn't expect the calm, the precision, the hellfire wrapped in silence. The room exploded with light and sound. 3 shots, each thunderclap louder than the last. 3 bodies dropped before the fourth even drew steel. Blood splattered the walls. One crashed into the dresser, knocking over a broken lamp. Another hit the floor hard, his legs twitching once before going still. Clara stood framed in moonlight, smoke curling from the barrel of her revolver. Her face didn't twist in rage. It didn't shake with fear. It was carved from stone, pale and fierce, the glint in her eyes colder than any blade. Only one remained. The youngest of them, barely more than a boy, had fallen to his knees, hands raised, eyes wide with a terror he hadn't known he could feel. He stared at her like she'd risen from the grave. "I didn't know," he stammered. "We didn't know who you was." Clara stepped closer, boots clicking softly through blood. "You should have known," she said, her voice no louder than a whisper. "You should have known who I buried." The boy trembled. "Please, please." She raised the revolver slowly, then paused. A beat of silence. Then she lowered it. "Get out." He didn't hesitate. Scrambled backward, slipped in his brother's blood, then tore out of the room and down the stairs, crashing through tables, stumbling over chairs, howling as he fled into the night. She listened to his retreating footsteps until they vanished down the road. Then the room was quiet again. Smoke drifted lazily in the air. Her breath was steady. She stood for a long moment, her eyes on the bodies. Then she moved to the window and looked out at the town. Somewhere beyond the hills, in the darkness, Pike Holloway would hear about this. About the 3 dead men. About the woman who walked away from fire and left death in her wake. He'd know. He'd finally know. She holstered the revolver and sat back on the bed. Blood pooled around her boots. The room smelled of gunpowder and fear. But Clara Briggs didn't tremble. She didn't shed a single tear. The war had only just begun. The mountains had no mercy. Wind howled like mourning spirits through jagged ridgelines, and snow clung stubbornly to high slopes despite the spring thaw. Clara's horse had gone lame 2 days back. She shot at herself to spare the suffering. Now, she moved on foot, blood crusted at her side, her coat torn, her face gaunt with exhaustion. Every breath scraped her throat raw. The last of her jerky was gone. Her water had run out half a day ago. Still, she pressed on, half mad with grief, half alive on rage alone. The storm came suddenly. Thunder rumbled low behind the peaks, and the clouds opened without warning. She staggered beneath a gnarled ash tree, boots slipping on wet stone. Her vision narrowed, only flashes of rock, moss, and cold. Her knees gave out. The last thing she saw was the swirl of pine needles and rain falling sideways. When she woke, it was to the crackle of fire. Warmth bloomed near her face. A shape moved nearby, silent, broad-shouldered, crouched by the flames like a ghost carved from the earth. She blinked, unsure if it was real. Her revolver was gone. Her boots had been removed. A blanket covered her chest. Her wound burned, but had been packed and wrapped with care. He didn't speak for hours. Not until the storm passed, and dawn broke pale and bone-chilled through the trees. Then, as he stirred the fire, he looked at her without expression and said, "You shoot like grief taught you how." She stared at him. His face was hard and windburned, framed by long dark hair pulled back at the nape. His eyes held no threat, just deep knowing, the kind forged from old pain and long solitude. He wore no badge, no uniform, no mark of tribe or side, just leathers patched from years of survival, and hands that knew work and wore both. "I didn't ask for help," she rasped, her voice more bark than breath. He looked away. "Didn't ask to find you either." She tried to rise, failed, and fell back with a sharp gasp. He left a pouch of herbs beside her and walked off without another word. That night, he returned with cooked rabbit. She didn't thank him. He didn't ask. The wind whistled through the ash trees above them, and the fire cast long shadows that danced like ghosts from her past. On the 3rd day, she tried to leave, saddled what remained of her gear, and limped downhill until snow turned to riverbed, and her legs gave out again. He found her by a fallen log, shivering with fever. Didn't scold her, just carried her back in silence, arms steady as stone. Later, as she sat cleaning her revolver, he watched her from across the fire. "You were in a war," he said finally. She looked up, surprised. "So were you." He didn't nod, didn't deny it. That night she asked, "Why help me?" He was quiet, so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Because you don't care if you live. And that's when the dying starts to matter." The word struck something hollow in her chest. She looked at him differently after that. He wasn't trying to save her. He was just showing her what survival looked like when it came without purpose. She began to watch him closely. The way he tracked a deer's path, but never drew his bow. The way he whispered to trees before he took wood for fire. He sang low, slow melodies in his language at night, eyes closed, hands still. She didn't understand the words, but they quieted something inside her. She let herself heal. There were no questions between them. He never asked her name. She never asked why he wandered these mountains alone. They shared what they had. Silence, fire, occasional warmth. He taught her how to find clean water for moss, which roots soothed fever, how to step without snapping twigs. She began to laugh again once, just once, when he fell asleep mid-watch, and she caught him snoring like a mule. He cracked one eye open but said nothing, the barest smirk pulling at the corner of his mouth. She carried her revolver differently now, not as a promise, but as a memory. She no longer cleaned it like a widow cleaning her husband's headstone. She cleaned it like a woman preparing for whatever came next. The night they reached the ridge, a hawk circled overhead. The valley stretched out below them in gold and green, alive with spring. She stood beside him in silence. "I think I can go on now," she said. He nodded once, eyes on the horizon. She offered her hand. "Naoka, right?" He looked down at it, then clasped it. His grip was strong, warm, real. They said no more. In the morning, she turned west. He turned east. She didn't look back. Neither did he. The canyon breathed fire beneath the moonlight. From the ridge above, Clara crouched beside Naoka, her eyes narrowing against the rising smoke and flickering lanterns that lined the encampment below. The gold operation pulsed with movement, men shouting, laughing, dragging crates, guarding rifles half-drunk and swaggering like gods of dirt. Pike Holloway's empire was stitched together from greed and blood, and it moved like a beast that never slept. Dozens of tents dotted the canyon floor, broken only by the massive command tent at the center. Armed men stood at its corners. A pile of dynamite lay near the horse corral, and a pulley system hoisted ore from the riverbed below, grinding loudly in the otherwise quiet desert night. Clara's fingers tightened around the scope of Jed's old rifle. "He's in there," she whispered. Naoka didn't respond. His eyes, sharp and still as stone, watched the patrols. His face gave nothing. Clara turned to him. "You don't have to come with me." Still, he said nothing. She looked away, voice lower now. "If I die in there, bury me next to Jed. Not near him. With him." That made him shift. A slow exhale escaped his lips, more breath than words, but it carried the weight of his decision. They moved at midnight. The sky was black silk, and the wind carried dust like prayers left unanswered. Clara slipped between the shadows like she'd been born in them, her boots silent, her revolver cold in her palm. Naoka circled wide, knife drawn, vanishing into the dark with the stillness of a wolf. The first sentry went down without a sound, Naoka's blade across his throat, his body lowered gently into scrub. Clara crawled beneath the pulleys, stepped over spilled gold chips, and ducked behind a barrel of lamp oil. A guard passed within inches. She could smell the liquor on his breath. She waited. A single gunshot cracked from the far edge of camp, Naoka's signal. A distraction. Shouts rose. The camp stirred. Clara moved. She reached the command tent just as the chaos behind her blossomed. Horses screamed. Flames licked skyward from the dynamite pile. Screams of pain and confusion rang through the canyon. And still, Pike's tent remained untouched. Silent. She slipped inside. The canvas swallowed the firelight outside, casting the interior in a dull red glow. Maps lined the table. Coins clinked in sacks near his boots. And there he stood, Pike Holloway. Older. His beard was silvered at the edges now, but his eyes were the same, venomous, calculating, cold. He didn't flinch when he saw her. "Well," he drawled, pouring himself a drink. "Never thought a crow like you'd find her wings." Clara leveled the revolver at him. Her hand shook, not from fear, but from something deeper, something older. "You killed him," she said. He swirled the glass, then drank. "I did. And I remember it real clear." She stepped forward. "He trusted you." "Jed was a fool," Pike said, tossing the empty glass aside. "He begged before I burned him. Said your name like it could save him. You really think love keeps a man from dying? Clara's voice cracked. No, but it's why you'll die screaming. She pulled the trigger. The hammer snapped on an empty chamber. Pike was faster than a man his age should have been, lunged, grabbed her wrist, twisted. The revolver hit the ground. They slammed into the table, knocking maps and coins to the floor. His fist caught her jaw. Her head snapped back. She kicked. He stumbled. She dove for the revolver, but he was on her, grabbing her by the coat and slamming her into the canvas wall. Her ribs screamed. He raised his gun, pressed it against her heart. I should have burned you too. Her hand searched blindly. Pike cocked the hammer. Then something moved behind him. Naoka burst through the back of the tent, silent, deadly. Pike spun too late. The blade caught his arm, slicing deep. He cried out, fired once. The bullet missed, hit the canvas. Naoka tackled him, both men crashing to the ground. Clara dragged herself upright, coughing, her fingers closing around Jed's revolver. Pike threw Naoka off, rolled to his knees, blood spilling from his arm. Clara aimed. Pike looked up at her, hatred and disbelief warring in his face. You think this makes you strong? Clara stepped forward. No, just finished. She pulled the trigger. Jed's revolver kicked once, echoing like thunder in the confined space. Pike Holloway hit the ground hard and didn't move again. The tent filled with smoke and silence. Clara stood there for a long time, staring at the body. Her hand finally lowered. Naoka touched her shoulder. Outside, the flames were dying. The night was still, and Pike Holloway was no longer a man the world had to fear. The rain came slow at first, soft as breath. It rolled down the canvas walls of the ruined tent, pooling in the dirt where Pike Holloway's blood had already darkened the ground. Clara stood over him, unmoving. Her revolver hung limp at her side, smoke trailing from the barrel like a ghost, not ready to leave. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. Her eyes were dry and distant, fixed on a man who had haunted her for half a year and hollowed her for longer. Now he lay sprawled in the mud like the rest of them, one more body, feeding the earth. But it didn't feel like justice. Not exactly. Justice had burned in the same fire that took Jed. This was something else, quieter, colder. A closing of the circle. Behind her, Naoka said nothing. He stood like a shadow beside her, the rain soaking into his braids, his blade still in hand. He hadn't asked why she spared the last Holloway boy, nor why she insisted on using Jed's revolver. He understood without needing words. Some things had to be done a certain way to mean anything at all. Clara finally turned away from the corpse. They climbed the ridge in silence. The storm picked up as they rose, rain thickening, wind sighing low through the canyon like it, too, was grieving. At the top, where the ground overlooked the blackened mining camp and the twisted, smoking remains of Pike's gold dream, Clara knelt beside a lone juniper. She pulled Jed's hat from her coat. It was old now, soft at the edges, blood-stiff in the crown. She held it like something sacred, like the last breath of a life that had once been kind. With bare hands, she dug into the wet earth. The soil clung to her fingers, gritty and cold. Naoka crouched beside her, helping wordless. When the hole was deep enough, she placed the hat inside, folding it gently as though Jed might still feel it. For a long moment, she just stared at it. Then she spoke. I told him once I'd never know how to go on if he died. I meant it, but I think I can now. She pressed her palm into the dirt. The wind tugged at her coat, trying to pull her away. She let it. When she stood, she didn't look down again. Naoka remained still. Water streaked down his face, hiding the way his expression softened. I don't have a place yet, Clara said quietly, but I know what direction to walk. He nodded. They didn't embrace. There were no goodbyes, just a shared look, deep knowing, the kind that only forms between two people who survive the same kind of fire. Then Naoka turned and melted into the trees, leaving only the soft sound of wet earth beneath his feet. Clara watched him go until he vanished. The sky cracked open as she descended the ridge, thunder rolling across the plains like a distant war still raging. Lightning lit the world in brief flashes, silver light on red rocks, bones of wagons long abandoned, the shine of water where there had once only been dust. Her steps were slow but steady. The revolver was holstered now. She passed Pike's body, without looking again. By morning, the camp would be nothing but ruin. She reached the edge of the canyon trail, paused once more. Behind her, the ridge stood tall and wind-bitten, the grave of a man who loved her and the resting place of the pain that almost destroyed her. Ahead, the land stretched wide and empty. She walked, and with every step, something lifted. The world didn't suddenly feel kind. It didn't offer hope or promise peace. But it felt honest, real, and for the first time in a long while, Clara Briggs no longer felt like a ghost haunting her own life. She was still a widow. But not only that, not anymore. They took her husband. They burned her home. And still, she didn't die. They never imagined that what rose from the ashes would be fire itself. The wind rose behind her, lifting the hem of her coat as she disappeared down the trail, and was gone.